Do you know what we've got lined up for tonight?
No idea. What?
One word.
Yeah.
Geronimo!
Geronimo!
We've got Helen MacDonald. Let's get her in and find out the story of Geronimo the Alpaca.
Let's do it.
Hi, I'm Mike Brampton.
And my name is Julian Ho.
Welcome to Veterinary Ramblings.
This is part 2 of our chat with Helen MacDonald, whom some of you will know as the owner of Geronimo the Alpaca.
If you've come straight in at this point, we strongly recommend that you listen to episode 1 first, where we cover more of the background behind this detailed story.
In this episode, we will learn more about the specifics of what happened to Geronimo.
So, with no further ado, let's get on with the show.
You gorgeous picture behind you, Helen, of a jet black alpaca, and we can scarcely make out the detail because it really is jet black against a black background.
And he's on a blackboard.
And that's Geronimo.
That's Geronimo. That was drawn for me.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about Geronimo?
Yeah, that picture that was drawn for me by a farmer last year who sent it to me. Just arrived in the post with a message on it. But yeah, Geronimo was amazing. Very happy, cheeky, by the end, very fat alpaca. And he came from New Zealand. And to improve the genetics in my herd, we don't have his genetics in the UK. And he was coming over to make a difference. And he did, but not in the way that we wanted him to.
No.
So, yeah, he's a very happy, outgoing, cheeky boy, which I think is why so many people just totally fell in love with him. He had a good name, which helped, but he's just a very special alpaca.
Did he come with the name?
He was named by the breeder in New Zealand after the song. There's a song called Say Geronimo, and he was born on Waitangi Day, which is the New Zealand National Day. So he was he was special to them too.
Well, all black, born on New Zealand Day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I picked him out with another one, and they came to the UK in August 2017 now, or 5 years ago.
Right.
Mm.
But then things didn't go very well.
Then things just went spectacularly wrong. And what should have been a very relatively straightforward series of conversations and careful monitoring and research turned into a 4-year fiasco, dragging in courts and the whole myriad of what went on. It's just it's still fun. It's shocking. And especially when these were vets. These were vets' decisions to do this. So basically what happened was he had a voluntary test, which everyone in the UK was using, a simple blood test for TB, because England has a endemic TB problem in cattle. And the Alpaca Society, the British Alpaca Society, had been pushing and funded this test with other stakeholders to get us a surveillance test, because alpacas and llamas and other camelids in the UK aren't livestock. They're not classified as livestock. And, we wanted to be responsible as an industry. We didn't want cattle farmers saying to us, oh, your animals are riddled with TB and they're spreading it around the country, which back in 2013, was becoming an issue because people realized that alpacas in England were getting TB. Not many, but there was a definite incidence. And so,
and there was the worry, wasn't there, that that TB could pass from alpacas, from camelids generally, to humans.
Yeah, of course.
And of course to cattle.
Yeah, it's a zoonotic disease. So it's notifiable. And you've got to do something about it. If you have infection in a herd, you need to deal with it. And, you know, I'm sure people thought, my God, what is this woman doing? You know, why is she so hell-bent that there's nothing wrong with this animal? And we sourced him from a farm where they've got hundreds of cattle, 900 odd alpacas last year, but they've had hundreds of alpacas for years. They've got sheep, they've got everything. TB free for 26 years. Government tested the cattle, voluntary tested their alpacas. Absolutely squeaky clean herd. They haven't had an alpaca TB case in over 20 years. And we know that because the New Zealand government told us that. But I didn't source animals from New Zealand, you know, on the basis that they might be diseased. You know, we did my homework, for goodness sake. We've got a herd here that's never had any issues. I remortgaged the farm in 2013 to put perimeter buried fencing around my farm. I've got the best biosecurity on any farm in the country, and I challenge anyone who wants to come and see my biosecurity, very happy to show them how we did it. It's not difficult, but it isn't cheap, and it's a bit fiddly, but it's certainly doable. Anyway, so, you know, there was absolutely no way that we bought in a tuberculous animal from New Zealand. So he passed all his tests along with the female that I bought. There's been 100 alpacas in quarantine. 29 of them came to the UK. And at the time, people wanted to promote this test and to get people using it and to have safe trading. You know, we had issues, and there was one of the things that goes on with TB is that people don't like talking about it. You know, and there's this sort of, oh my God, your herds have got, it's bad enough with parasites, let alone something like TB. So, you know, people need to be responsible about this stuff. So we did this test, and it was a 4-spot positive, which was absolutely unbelievable. You know, I actually came back from the vets. I was picking some drugs up, and there was APHA on the phone at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. Your alpaca's got TB. We're coming to kill it next week. And so that weekend was not good.
Not good, no.
Not good.
That's
literally
what
they
said.
That was the start of it, yeah. So that was September 2017. So I wrote a letter, I got a lawyer, and I said, look, there's absolutely no evidence here. This test isn't right. We had testimony from New Zealand. We had testimony from the test developers. We had, you know, it was just like, okay, there's an issue here. They said, okay, well, we'll retest him. Now, the definition of a retest is to repeat the test, okay? But no. DEFRA said, you have to do it our way or we'll kill him. And so what they decided to do was to treat him as if he was confirmed as having TB or strongly suspicious of having TB. So they made him have more tuberculin. So we realized at this point that he'd had 4 injections of tuberculin in New Zealand.
And tuberculin is a protein
is
derived.
Part of exactly PBD, protein derived, purified protein derivative. And so we said, well, hang on a minute. This test has measured what he's had. It is certainly possible. Oh, it's not possible. No, of course it's not possible. That can't possibly happen. So anyway, they said, well, we're going to do this. So you have to now have avian and bovine TB in the comparative skin test. And then you need to have 2 blood tests. So we said, well, we discussed it with the developers and some other vets and said, well, we'll have to do the Enfaplex test again because you're trying to work out what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. So we did the Enfaplex test, and we did another antibody test called DPP, which has the same antibodies in it as the Enfaplex test, which was completely negative, the DPP. But the Enfaplex test was gone from 4-spot, despite that last tuberculin injection, his antibody levels more than halved. Mm-hmm. But DEFRA said, oh, well, no, because we're changing the threshold now. They said this at the outset. So we knew that we had to do this test or not. They were going to kill him otherwise. We had no choice. And they reduced the threshold to 2-spot.
Well, was that just for Geronimo? Was it across the board?
Yeah, so he was treated exceptionally. And I was treated exceptionally. And we found out eventually when we went to court that the reason they were going to retest him was because they didn't want to get sued. Now, instead of just sitting there and saying, well, okay, look, there's an issue here. Let's wait 6 months. We'll test him again. We'll do tests. We'll, get him x-rayed, whatever else. Let's just he's in isolation. They accepted he was in isolation. They accepted him. He hadn't got it in the UK. Because of the time that we tested. We said, well, we know he hasn't got it in New Zealand. So this retest happened just before Christmas. They changed my case officer and they got this girl to ring me up and we're coming for the reactor tomorrow. We're going to come and kill him. And, this went on day in, day out for some time. And then in January, then the letters got a bit nastier. You have to let us kill this animal. Well, no, we don't actually, because there's something not right here. So we just kept fighting. I got to the point where they offered me a phone call in February 2018 with a senior veterinary surgeon from the government to explain to me why my animal was infected with TB. So I said, well, no, that's not good enough. I want a face-to-face meeting. So I took myself off to DEFRA at 3:00 on a Friday afternoon. And I sat down there with head of TB policy, the TB advisor, who was on a speakerphone, and the deputy chief veterinary officer at the time. And I sat there, I had 3 pages of questions, and I was asking, what is the specificity of a multiple primed enthoplex test? And I never got an answer. In 2.5 hours, they just sat there and blanked me.
So just to sort of translate that for some of our listeners who may be struggling with the quagmire of terms
talking
here.
Japanese.
The enthoplex test is a test for antibodies against tuberculosis, and depending on the particular brand of a particular type of enthoplex test, somewhere between 7 and 11 individual antibodies that it tests by having antigens stuck on little spots on the surface of this test. The antibodies in the blood will stick to those, a colour change will occur, and it'll then light up either as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, or none.
Yes.
And so what you wanted to know was, having primed, or in other words, inoculated the alpaca against tuberculosis, was it possible that false positives could occur? Is it sensitive enough to pick up those false positives? Is it specific enough not to pick up those false positives? And you never got an answer to that.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And see, I was told it was a false positive. False positives happen. It's okay. We'll retest him, but the legal letters don't say the same thing. But so that's what we wanted to know. We looked back at the validation paper of 2012, which is the only paper for the enthoplex test. And as you said, it's 7 antibodies. So most antibody tests only have 2 or 3, and they're combined. So this 7-spotted test, it was chosen by the alpaca societies because it was, you could modify, you could improve it. It got 7 different things on it. They were independent, and you could evolve the test going forward. And that was what we were all promised in 2015. Yes, it's going to be the beginning of something that we can make more accurate and yada, yada, and we'll sort out any teething problems, right? But I didn't do it thinking there was going to be any teething problems.
No.
So we ended up with this declining antibody response to the second test. And they said, well, no, we say he's 2-spot positive on this. Everything else was negative, but we're still going to kill him because he must have TB because it's highly specific. But they hadn't done the data, they hadn't done the research. So we knew that the validation was only for the blood test when used on its own. And any prior tuberculin injections, they have no idea what the effect is on that test. And they still don't, because they're refusing to do the research. So I said, well, look, this has happened. Let's keep him in isolation. Let's study him. And we said back in 2018, there's a legal, under the Animal Health Act, you can isolate for research purposes. Now he wasn't isolated. It's just worth pointing out. He was living with companions, and all the time he had 2 acres of ground and a barn, and he had everything that he wanted. So he wasn't stuck in a pen by himself for 4 years. There's no way that we would have done that. And likewise, if we had any suspicion that he had disease, then we wouldn't have kept him alive. I mean, that was just, at the end of the day, I'm a professional veterinary nurse, and I was questioning the lack of science and the fact that there was no data. And hang on a minute, there's an issue here. Can we not all just grow up and work together to solve it? But no. And so 6 months after he was all this debacle over the second test, we found out that actually DEFRA already knew that double primed animals, so those that had 2 injections within 12 months, and then were being tested with this blood test, were inexplicably going positive. And they already knew since a year before, and they didn't declare it. That we were supposed to be killed one day in March. I had to agree to have him put to sleep. We'd run out of options. We didn't see how we could go any further. And they were coming for him the next day. And the British Alpaca Society sent a letter to the government and said, well, hang on a minute, we discussed this in 2016. And I got a text message saying the cull's cancelled. And that was in March, and I didn't hear another thing until August, not one word. And then, so we used to have these protracted silences where things wouldn't happen. And then they would come back and say, oh, I've still got to kill him, and I've looked at this and it was horrific. It was unnecessary. It was unscientific, and it was just downright. It was irrational. I mean, we took him to court on the basis that the Secretary of State was irrational, but the judge felt that they weren't irrational enough because they had looked at it. That the test for judicial review wasn't whether they thought Geronimo had TB or not. They accepted that he might not have it. The legal tests are very different. They sat there in court and said, well, this isn't the place for science. This is about, did the Secretary of State make a reasonable decision? Well, the fact that decision was based on dishonesty and manipulation and, well, I'm saying this antibody does this when it doesn't, and all of the malarkey that went on. And I have read so many clinical papers. I tell you, I was up every weekend. We were up all hours, challenging what they were saying because we knew it was just not accurate. We had that battle, and then you think, come on, someone use some common sense here. Yeah, they accepted he's no risk to anybody because he was in isolation with his friends. We had him X-rayed. He had ultrasound exams regularly. He had his own vet, a camelid, very experienced camelid vet. And we had an expert witness for court who's a very senior veterinary surgeon. And yet the government were like, no, not doing it. And then they kept giving me these ultimatums. It's August now. Well, you need to kill him by the end of the month, or we're going to get a warrant. And that was like 2020, I think. And we said, look, time's gone on, guys. He didn't get TB. Now, when I went to that meeting at DEFRA in 2018, the head of TB policy sat there and he said, no, don't worry about your questions. Don't worry about those. Let's go back to New Zealand. Okay. Well, it's perfectly possible he might have met a possum or caught it at a show. And I'm like,
met a possum.
You know me? Yeah. And this is the sort of rubbish that we were dealing with. And I said, is that the best you've got? It's laughable. This is a disease that happens in...
I do apologise. I didn't mean to...
I'm going to write a book.
The phrase,
going to write a book.
He might have met a possum.
It was just, and then they were saying, well, there was another outbreak of TB in this country. We can't have another one of those situations. And I said, it's completely flipping different. Anyway, they denied they knew what was going on. They threatened the test developer. They wouldn't agree to any testing. And all the time, and even in court challenges, we were saying, test him, test his companions, give them all the tests, and let's see what's going on here. I mean, we were very open about that.
Yeah, do all the tests. Let's validate them.
Exactly. Let's look at it properly, get experts from both sides, put it all before the court and let the court decide. Well, they wouldn't have it. They said, oh, if we test him again and it's negative, it will be a false negative. Now, when you've got vets in a room, they just can't believe the sort of excuses we were getting with the last stages of the court hearings and everything else that we went through from 2020 onwards. Really, no one was gonna listen. They wouldn't go against the High Court judgment of the judicial review. So that judgment was unjust. I'm never going to get over that. I just find that so hard to accept. But everything that happened after was, the High Court said this, so therefore we're not going to change, even though 2 years had gone on and there was more evidence, they weren't interested. The issue is that if you have a suspicion of disease, no matter how it has come about, that's it. In law, they can do what they like. And what we wanted to show was that, we had no defense. We were not able to defend ourselves by having permission to do those additional tests, because we couldn't, the Secretary of State wouldn't give us permission to do those tests. So we were in a catch-22. And ultimately, so we got the world involved, and that wasn't good enough either. And we tried.
The world is not enough, as
very much so. Yeah, it was. People were saying to us, "Oh, they wouldn't be so sick to do this. They just wouldn't do it." And I'm like, "They can. They've not listened for 4 years. They don't care. They don't care about eradicating an endemic disease from England, which was what this is about. It had nothing to do with Geronimo. It wasn't even about TB. They were scared, and they live in fear that the policies are not working, and they can't afford to be challenged on it, because they would open the floodgates. And, Mark Spencer, the chief whip at the time, sent a WhatsApp round, apparently, because we came out of Freedom of Information request saying, oh, well, if we say no to Geronimo, then everybody will be challenging us and will be sued, and everyone will be kicking off because their animals have died, But this was a unique situation with no precedent. There was never a precedent here. This was about learning, and this was about veterinary surgeons, senior veterinary surgeons in government, having the professionalism and the scientific ability to say, look, this test isn't valid, so therefore how can the result be valid? And they were relying on the test results 4 years later. So, as a nurse, as somebody who's worked in the industry for 30 years with many, many vets, hundreds of vets and consultants and specialists and all sorts of things, I feel particularly betrayed, not just by the government and the courts, but by the veterinary profession, because there's people in government that know how to behave, and they're not, and I'm not afraid to say it. And that's probably why I'm not very popular in the government. But, somebody's got to make a stand against scientific reasoning. It's just, that was absolutely awful what they did to him.
Yeah. To fill in listeners who may or may not be aware, ultimately, Geronimo was taken from the farm and was put to sleep, wasn't he?
We're not quite sure about that, actually. We still don't know how he died. They had a warrant. The court basically gave Secretary of State a warrant, which he could have chosen not to execute, but he did. And they turned up with the police, and they seized him and dragged him out of his home with a cattle rope, which was not an alpaca-specific head collar, which caused him all sorts of distress. He couldn't breathe. He had a very tight-fitting rope around the back of his neck. They dragged him into a horse trailer in the lane, and they tied him up short to the side of that trailer, so he couldn't sit down and he couldn't breathe very well. I've seen the photographs now and the video footage, and yeah, it's just horrible. It's the most awful thing I've seen in 30 years, I think. But they did that, and they took him, but they won't tell me. They say he was euthanized at the destination, which was about 50 to 60 minutes away, but they won't give me any proof. And given that he couldn't sit down and he was held up tight by that rope, which was cutting into his neck and squashing his nose, I believe he was probably died in that trailer. But I can't, to this day, I can't find out. And it's going to have to come out at some point. But nobody, if they have nothing to hide, why can't they show me CCTV footage of the facility with him walking out of the trailer, not stressed, as they claim, you know? It's just another thing, isn't it?
Well, and subsequent post-mortem and tests showed that Geronimo had no evidence of TB.
That's right. Yeah, but then it twisted a bit more, didn't it? Because there was atypical lesions on the preliminary post-mortem.
Mm-hmm.
And that went to the pathologists and they found nothing. So there was no evidence of TB on any of the pathology examinations, none of the bacterial staining or any of the other procedures. They couldn't find anything. They cultured the samples and they couldn't find anything. The culture report says M. bovis not detected. And then the chief veterinary officer turned around and during that period of time while we were waiting for the pathology reports, said that he had hallmark TB-like lesions and the rest of the herd would have to be tested. And then the culture result came out and she said, which was leaked to the press without my permission. I don't know who did it. Somebody in DEFRA did that. That's another issue I've got to deal with. But she said that they couldn't do the genome sequencing, whole genome sequencing, and so they can't understand how he came infected in the first place, which is another false claim by the chief veterinary officer.
Genome sequencing of the TB.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so they couldn't find any TB.
Again, just to explain to listeners, there are various types of bacteria that cause tuberculosis. Not types, but variants, serotypes. So it's Mycobacteria bovis, Mycobacteria tuberculosis, and various subtypes and variants that can cause it. The generally well-recognized way of determining which variant is present is to sequence the genome, but you need the whole genome to be able to work out what it is. Now, if you're not growing the mycobacterium, then you've got no genome to sequence. So that thereby hangs the problem. Without knowing the sequence, you don't know which particular variant or isolate it is, and therefore you don't know where it's likely to have come from.
Yes, except in this case, had they have found TB, they would have whole genome sequenced it and found a type from New Zealand. But of course, they couldn't do that because there wasn't any TB in New Zealand, but they're still trying to make out that Geronimo was infected with TB and they don't know how that happened. So some sort of immaculate conception of a progressive wasting disease, which took him, if he really did meet a possum at the show, would have been at the beginning of 2015, which was 6 years with a progressive wasting disease where he got fatter every year. So,
we need to track down that possum. That's the one that's to blame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're sort of Australian badgers, aren't they, really? I move on very quickly.
We interrupt the show for an important announcement.
Hi there, dedicated listeners. We just wanted to take a little time outside of the show as we got something very exciting to share with you.
We have exclusive Veterinary Ramblings merchandise available now, including T-shirts, mugs, posters and prints.
Now, personally, I think my favourite is our T-shirt with a hilarious diagram of cat anatomy, which has been revised to include their sandpaper tongue and treat-detecting ears.
And essential for all veterinary students. If you would like to show your support for the show, head over to veterinaryramblings.com and select either the merch button for a one-off purchase through our T-Mill store, or select Become a Patron.
I'm sure you'll be absolutely chuffed to know that everything in our T-Mill store is fully sustainable, carbon neutral, and shipped in plastic-free packaging. By making a one-off purchase, you will help us to plant more trees, save water, and reduce carbon emissions.
If you want to further support us, become a Patreon and receive items you cannot get through one-off purchasing, a shout out on the show, and exclusive Veterinary Ramblings content.
Every single purchase made will really help us keep on interviewing amazing guests. But if nothing else, we do appreciate you tuning in.
Now,
on with the show. Can we move on to Geronimo's law?
That part of the story is not ended very well, but that is not the end of the story, is it?
No, not at all. No, we're just getting started now. So, well, what should have happened is that the government should have said, oh, look, hang on, Geronimo can be a poster boy for vaccination, because we had a company who was going to develop a TB vaccination, and we could have turned this into a really positive story. And they chose not. So they chose to chuck away £1 billion opportunity to develop vaccinations for animals and subsequently humans for TB. There was such an outcry. We had, I have to say that during August, when I spent the best part of a month educating the entire planet on Geronimo's story and TB in England and goodness knows what else I ended up talking about, we had such a massive privilege. It was just, I've been so lucky in so many ways over that 4 years. The doors kept opening, people kept coming forward to help. We had, barristers and lawyers and so much love out there for this little black alpaca. We had all this opportunity, and from that arose a campaign group, and I didn't know anything about it, because after it happened, I just disappeared to my bed for some time, and it was just horrendous. But and a group of people that I didn't know formed a campaign group, and there's 1,700 people in that now. So that's We Are Geronimo, and it's on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, so this amazing campaign group, and they're all people from all walks of life. Some of them don't even have any animals. Some of them have only just recently met an alpaca at one of our National Open Day that was last weekend. And the spectrum of people has just been fantastic. And so they've all got together. Geronimo's law is really now about reforming TB policy for England and for the UK, so that this doesn't happen again, because TB is a nasty, and they keep saying, insidious disease, and nobody's saying it's not. It's a notifiable disease, it's zoonotic, and we need to get rid of it. But there are very basic things that is not being done to get rid of it. We're actually spreading disease by using poorly sensitized tests in cattle and then lifting restrictions. It beggars belief. It just doesn't make sense. And there's so many little things that when you read TB policy, there's gaps. There's, even the APHA vets don't follow biosecurity properly.
I guess you could liken it to the pandemic, for example, just for the sake of argument, imagine a situation where the whole of the country is in lockdown, and yet people who are likely to come into contact with huge numbers of other people in small areas, I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, those people suddenly then decide on a whim to go to other parts of the country and to meet up with other people. I don't know. There's something in that. There's just something forming in that. I don't know why Barnard Castle just flashed up, but there's something that just makes me think biosecurity isn't always foremost in the government's mind.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's just basic. Yeah, as a nurse, we learn how to manage isolation patients, right? The first thing you do is basic hand cleaning, hygiene, barrier nursing, all of these things. every farm should be treated like that. I'm not saying, put it in glass house, but basic things. And COVID is an absolute classic parallel. We've had TB in England for decades and not getting anywhere, and it's spreading. And yet COVID comes along. Yes, we watched it come from China and wait for it to infect a few million people before we did much about it. But they had a vaccine, had therapies, they had everything within 2 years because some people got the right brains together and chucked a load of money at it and got rid of it, and controlled it. It's not got rid of, but we have a better chance of keeping people alive now. 205,000 people died, but the people going forward, they did something. And yet TB, no, we just seem to be wanting to perpetuate it. Doesn't make sense.
I guess there was a concerted effort, a multi-parameter, a multi-lateral way of thinking about the problem with COVID, wasn't there? A lot of disciplines got together and thought of different ways of attacking the virus, different ways of attacking spread, different ways of maintaining biosecurity. And I guess your argument is that hasn't happened with TB in cattle and in camelids. There's been perhaps a single-minded, uniplanar way of attempting to stop it, which doesn't seem to be working.
Well, I think it's worse than that, because I think that the government have the sort of the policy for the cattle, but they actually we've got a wildlife situation with the badgers who are spillover species like camelids. So we have others. We've had TB in hunting hounds. We've had TB in cats from infected meat. We've got, it's not just cattle, but at the same time, these other species are being infected because the cattle is the primary problem because of poor testing and poor movement, or not restricting movement, and there's lack of biosecurity. And it seems to me that this has been going on for decades, well before. I'm talking about something I don't even want to be talking about, but I'm in it now. It's part of my life, and I've never even seen it. It's just, but we've got this government on one side, and they actually want the farmers and the badger folk at each other's throats. It's almost like they're sitting back going, I'll just leave them to fight it out because it's easier than dealing with the problem. If they got biosecurity under control by actually rewarding farmers and helping them fund it, and kept their farms where we have disease under lockdown for longer and use different tests. And we've got new tests coming on now which can identify TB and bovis floating around in blood and milk, and we should be using those tools to treat those herds in isolation to remove those animals that need removing. And then if you biosecure, you're not spilling over. If you're managing your slurry, you're not spilling over into other species. It's not rocket science, and yet the will's not there. George Eustace has been saying since 2013, it's very difficult. Oh, really? It's a terrible disease. My poor cow died of it. Well, what's he done to protect his own herd? I'm sorry, but that just doesn't make sense. I protected my herd and I got punished for it. Geronimo lost his life for it because government vets are too afraid to get some balls and actually deal with the problem properly. And there are brilliant farmers out there, and there's young farmers coming through, which hopefully will help. And we've got a lot of farmers that are understand what happened to Geronimo, which was very different to what happened in cattle. But we've also got an awful lot of people out there that just say, oh, well, let's wait and see what happens when it happens. And I know people around here that are like that. It's not good enough.
Sure. So what would you like to see happen with Geronimo's rule or law? If you could wave a magic wand and say Geronimo's law comes into fruition next week, what would you like it to encompass? Just TB, or rights generally for the individual animal in law?
I would like, I mean, obviously TB is the topic that we got dragged into, but Geronimo stands up for so much more than that. He stands up for welfare, for best practice, and really for animal welfare first. You know, no animal should be treated like he was. People should be able to visit a farm and have good biosecurity, and have a big sign on the front gate saying, this is a Geronimo farm, and we have Geronimo standards on here. So we have good biosecurity, we treat our animals well, we support that ethos, and we want animals to be treated like sentient beings. We want science to be credible and validated before you start experimenting on new species and pretending that you know what you're doing. And let's have some credibility behind government decisions, and everyone just accept that there are other ways of doing things and there are better ways of doing things. And it might not be the easiest, it might not be the cheapest, but if you genuinely want to get rid of disease, then you've got to tackle it head on and deal with it. And what I keep being told by people is, well, we have to balance it with economics and exports. We don't have to export cattle meat if we don't want to. We're not in the EU anymore.
No, nobody will take our meat anymore, will they?
Oh, exactly. but we have choices, you know, and those choices might not be easy or popular or whatever, but they've got to be made. You either want to eradicate disease of TB and other diseases from this country, or you don't. They're doing it with BVD. BVD, they took it by the horns and they said, right, okay, let's try and get rid of it. And they're doing that. We've got check schemes for BVD and stuff in cattle. Doesn't seem to be a major issue in camelids. And my message to camelid people, camelid vets, owners, whatever, fence it out, keep it out, get biosecure, and you should not, and don't buy it in, and make proper buying choices. On-farm risk assessments. Vets should be working with every farm, doing proper farm risk assessments, and let's get on top of it. If government started to fund positive behaviour and stop threatening people, give them the biosecurity tools, fund it, you know, reduce compensation if they refuse. I'm sorry, that might not be popular, but that's what's going to have to happen if we're going to really tackle it. And, you know, there's no point sitting there in government going, oh, it's really difficult. That's all that's doing. That's negligence. You know, that's not helping animals. It's not helping the wildlife. It's certainly not helping owners. You know, we know what the suicide rates are in the farming and veterinary industry. You don't need to be reminded about that. You know,
we're winners there, aren't we?
Yeah, there's massive knock-on effects that are not measured. You know, and you've got these apathetic people who would rather sit in government and be dishonest. And I think one of the things that people are so shocked about is that the degree and the pattern of behaviour that we uncovered over the last 4, if now 5 years, is horrific. Nobody should have to put up with that. Nobody. And we got to change it. So, yeah, so Geronimo's law stands up for whatever fits, really. I mean, it's just, we could go on and on, you know.
So if anybody's interested in Geronimo's law and this group that's come together, how do you interact with them?
It's Facebook and Twitter predominantly. We've got we're building a website at the moment. So it's you can search for wearegeronimo.org. On Twitter and Facebook, and you'll find us with official group on Facebook, and you'll see Geronimo's smiley face on those. And then, yeah, some people do an awful lot, some people don't do so much, but it's about sharing stories. We've got farmers on there, cattle farmers, or pig farmers, deer farmers, all sorts of people, vets, nurses, anyone that's interested, really, not just in the science side of it, but in the ethics and the morality of what we're doing, you know. And I mean, we have a lot of, one of the things that was so great in August when everyone was descending on us and we had press queuing up outside and it was mad. But we had the hunt sabs, we had badger huggers, whatever you want to call them, but scientists, vets, I mean, people just turned up to help and they all met each other. And they all have these animal-focused welfare groups and campaign groups that they support. And then they all met each other. And it was amazing because they didn't get that opportunity anywhere else. And they kept saying, this is great. You know, a sort of animal welfare lobby has come together on our farm. And wow. It was a very surreal time. But we're all on the same side, right? We all want animal welfare, healthy animals live long, healthy lives, or even short, happy lives. But
I think you're right. I think that must be the only way, mustn't it, to look at things. We are all on that same side, and it's going to take some sort of rationale to make sure that people see it as that side. Yeah. Whether some of us are right, whether some of us are wrong, whether all of us are right. And I guess I perhaps have a naive trust in the law, not necessarily in the way the law is executed, but in the way the law is devised, because I think the law is devised in a very robust way. I think, unfortunately, it's sometimes prone to misuse, but hopefully Geronimo's law will be devised in a very robust and tested way. And let's hope that happens. I guess that there's so much more we could say about Geronimo and about your struggle. I just really wanted to offer my sympathy, and I know Mike that does as well, on your loss, and the hope that out of all of this, some good comes. And I think always when we raise a cry and a hue, the hope is that out of the noise, some sort of rational thought is evoked.
Well, I agree, and it's been a very difficult, awful 5 years, but on the other side, it's been amazingly positive, and we're learning. We haven't run a campaign before. I've got a whole new skill set that I've learned in the last 4 years. I can read papers, I can read legal documents. Oh my goodness, the stuff I've had to do. But it's a challenge, and you have to take it head on, and you have to just fight until you can fight no more. And we lost Geronimo, but he's still with me. He's here. He's with all of us, and he stands up for something that the government couldn't destroy. And it's not about winning and losing. It's just about what's right. And we'll say we're still learning, and any help we can get. I mean, I need help. I've got to write a book because people keep saying, "When are you going to write the book?" And I haven't been able to face it till recently. But one of those things. It's all there. It just needs putting together. But there's a lot to be done. And as you say, when something awful happens, usually someone will pick it up and run with it, and things will change. And we have to do that. I hate that word justice, but that's where we are. We should have had a happy, smiley boy promoting TB eradication, but they saw not fit not to do that. So that's on them.
And in the meantime, you still have this herd of alpacas that you're looking after, and I wonder whether there's some way that you could educate some of us in looking after alpacas. I don't know, Mike. What would you think?
I know, Julian. I know.
Yes. Go on. Good hands.
Helen, have you ever come across a thing called 60-second CPD?
I have, yes, I have. I wish it was a 5-minute CPD. But
I think we've actually had an hour and a half CPD, to be honest with you, because I know I've learned an awful lot tonight. But I think it'd be wonderful. Would you be up for the challenge?
I would. I will take it on. Yeah.
You'll take on the 60-second CPD challenge.
I'll give it a go. I'd actually forgotten about it, but
it's quite all right, Helen. We hadn't. We love it. So,
we're like elephants. Yeah.
So what are you going to do your 60-second CPD on?
What you need to know about alpacas for vets.
Okay, so Helen MacDonald, what you need to learn about alpacas, 60 seconds, starting now.
Alpacas are a unique species and they're not like sheep, cattle, or deer. As herd animals, they must be kept with same-sex companions in all circumstances. When the owner calls and says my alpaca is just not right, go armed with blood tubes and fecal pots. Intestinal parasites are the biggest cause of mortality. If alpacas cannot see through their facial fleece, they will be stressed to make your life harder. Head collars must be fitted correctly. They're semi-obligate nasal breathers. Alpacas are just as likely to kick and spit, but staying at the shoulder will avoid both ends. Plan your exam. They exhibit wind-up like cats. Handling less is more. Subcut injections with short dog-sized needles, please. IM injections are rarely required. Alpacas are extremely stoic, but in cases of lameness can be complete drama queens. Skin cases are not always due to mites. If a cria does not get up and run away after birth, urgent intervention is needed. Lastly, everyone will always be learning about camelids.
There we go.
Wow. Fantastic. And that's all we'll ever need to know as myself as a vet. That's all we'll ever need to know about camelids. That's fantastic.
That's very nice.
That's really good. Yeah. And you missed out the fact that some of them look a bit like Roger Waters from the Live in Pompeii album. But yeah, that's fantastic. That's really good.
I had to keep shortening it and timing it. It was like, oh gosh, so I'm going to just talk really fast and hope I don't trip over any words.
Good. Oh, it was good work. It was good work, Helen. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so
that was a good challenge. It's a good challenge.
There we go. Well, thank you very much. Okay, clever clogs then. You got Helen to do a 60-second CPD. Have you got a certificate?
This is a certificate of evidential camels, llamas, alpacas, guanacos, vicunas, camels, Bactrian, and dromedary.
Yay!
Are our favourite even-toed ungulates. And I mentioned even-toed ungulates because regular listeners will know that that there are also odd-toed ungulates, of which my favourite is, of course, a tapir.
Oh, yes. They're lovely, aren't they?
So it's and we like camel toes, don't we? Because they are these little even-toed ungulates. We like camel toes. So there we go. And we got I
had nothing to do with that.
Mike told me that sounded rather rude, but I just we're talking about odd-toed and even-toed ungulates. We've got to like them, haven't we? There's a llama there. There's a Bactrian camel there, one hump or two. There's another Bactrian camel there because I didn't have a picture of a dromedary. Now there's some local alpacas, little white ones, and little tapir there, and me scuba diving.
Fabulous.
Just to add the whole mix in.
Well, the CPD certificate, we've had CPD, we've had a CPD certificate, but as we are reliably informed, CPD is not CPD unless we reflect on what we have learned.
Yes.
So for our newly found listeners, they'll have come across the fact that we also like to ask a reflection question. Do you have a reflection question?
I do have a reflective question.
I think it's going to be somewhat poignant.
Well, yes. I mean, I think everyone's life has choices. And I think as veterinary professionals, where we may be employed or we may actually employ others, is there a line, and where do we draw the line between doing what has always been done and is therefore easy, just to go with the flow, or standing up for what is right based on evidence, professionalism, and ethics?
Very good.
Yes. Yeah.
Very good question.
Difficult.
So often we hear I've always done it this way.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily right or the best way of doing it, is it?
No.
The thing is, I think if nothing would change if there weren't instances where you just have to say, no, I'm not accepting that. That's not what I understand to be right or true or morally acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I've made a rod for my own back, I think, in my journey, and I can't change it now. But had I have not done that, if I had not have stood up, then Geronimo would have been killed, nothing would have been learned, and nothing would have changed. And he had 4 years, and we have to take that. It's not enough, but we have to accept that he had 4 happy years with us, and he's going to change the world with any luck.
I can't top that, and I think that rounds things off so very nicely. And don't forget, if you like what you've heard or you want to hear more, get in touch with us. Don't forget to click like, share, and subscribe. It really does make a difference to us and helps keep the show rolling. So, Helen MacDonald, I can't top that. I'm just going to have to say thank you so much for sharing so openly with us tonight. And well, may your dog go with you doesn't quite sound right.
No, may your camelid go with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May your camelid go with you. I'll raise a glass to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I've actually really enjoyed this evening.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
May your camelid go with you.
Yes, indeed.